Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Thank you for joining me live today on Wednesday, September 25th here, halfway through the week. We got Week 4 starting tomorrow. We're not going to get to that just yet. We're going to save that to tomorrow. But today we're going to go over some interesting topics I wanted to bring up that I thought would be interesting to bring up on today's show. After the big win on Monday, head coach of the Commanders, Dan Quinn, mentioned his thoughts on Jayden Daniels and kind of addressed the ideas of past Commanders quarterbacks and how the success of them could predicate the success now of Jayden Daniels. He addresses those concerns in the first segment, then also in the second segment, talking about young quarterbacks. We look at Will Levis and Caleb Williams. Who is in a more concerning spot right now, and who do we feel most confident about that can get out of it sooner rather than later? Plus some more topics down the line as well. Make sure to stick around for that. And before we get started, I'd like to remind you guys, with so many things going on in the NFL, topics that I'd like to share with you guys, please don't hesitate to share any input or anything you'd like to say in any of the live shows. If you got a question, an opinion you have to share, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat box. Now, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to go about that. Just use our new super chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we always appreciate it whenever you guys are able to do that for us. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit the super chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. I love hearing what you guys have to say, any questions you might have, and it always makes the show a lot more entertaining, I feel like, when you guys are involved. Please go and do that. Your amazing support is very much appreciated, and we thank you guys for being part of our community. But with that being said, now we can start off talking a little bit more about Monday's game, right? Just really focusing in on the Commanders here, because Monday night was a perfect display for the Washington Commanders here to sort of validate their efforts, reward their efforts really for this rebuild that they've started at the beginning of this offseason. Now you're kind of starting to see some compensation for all their hard work, right? Because it starts from really the cleaning house of everything, right? You start with a new owner in Josh Harris coming in last year. Then you bring in a new general manager in Adam Peters, a new head coach in Dan Quinn, and also a new offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury. It's not only impressive how many people they brought in and, changing pretty much everything about the organization from the major roles from general manager, owner, and coach, right? It's who they've brought in, right? And what they bring to the equation. You got Cliff Kingsbury and Dan Quinn, two coaches, coordinators that have had NFL experience, have been head coaches, have been in different systems around different players. They know what essentially works and what doesn't work. And also, you have a general manager coming from the San Francisco 49ers, who have been one of the elite organizations over the last few years in terms of success, player development, just getting the best out of everybody in that organization. You bring in someone from that culture to kind of establish your own here in Washington, right? And just talking about excellence to the highest level, I think that's what Washington had in mind when they began on this journey. And now their plan to build this organization back up, it takes a major step forward back on Monday, like I mentioned, when it looks like you finally have a good idea that your quarterback that you drafted so high in Jayden Daniels looks like a guy, right? Looks like the guy that can take this franchise back to like the glory days, I guess you could say, for a lack of better terms, right? Because it's been a while since we've mentioned a game-changing, dynamic quarterback like Jayden Daniels in Washington. The most famous and recent one was probably RG3, and that one ended in a catastrophic way, just crashing and burning, evidently in such a short period of time. You don't want that to happen again. And obviously now their mission this offseason was to go out and find another one of those guys. It looks like they have one in Jayden Daniels now, but also to not only find the guy, right, that's the first step, but to build a culture and adequate roster around him to make sure that not only you get him, but you're able to succeed with him. And that's the next step in this entire process now. The Commanders, to me, have hit on every single part, bringing in the personnel, the pieces around Jayden Daniels, looking at Jayden Daniels now like he could be an elite quarterback. Now it's about staying there, right, and how you can improve from that point on. And going on the road to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league, to get everybody's attention essentially and get everybody hyped up about it. It's all great, right? It brings a lot more energy, excitement to the city, but head coach Dan Quinn wanted to sort of keep everybody in check a little bit, to not overhype this process, because like I mentioned, they are very early on in this step, right? Because he said on the idea of any concerns or overhyping Jayden Daniels up until this point, he said, I definitely understand our fan base has been waiting for the franchise quarterback, but I also don't want Jayden feeling any ghosts, making sure he understands there's only one name on the back of that jersey, and that's for him. And in reference, he's basically saying that any fans in Washington might look at this situation and think, like, oh, we've been here before. We've seen it with RG3. This is just it happening all over again. We're going to hold off on our excitement for right now, and we don't know what to think of it right now. They're more pessimistic is basically what he's trying to say, rather than some other fans maybe being too excited about it. He wants everybody to kind of keep an even keel about it. Up until this point, we know, we've only seen one breakout game, right? Who knows what the rest of the season is going to look like? But projecting and looking forward now, I like what Dan Quinn is saying. I agree with what he's saying, because Daniels, to me, doesn't have to appease anyone worrying about the past or anybody worrying about what he can be going forward. Because what I love about this idea and why I started off talking about the pieces that have been brought into Washington is because anybody that has the worries that this could end up like RG3 is the easiest example, right? Mobile, exciting, MVP, offensive player of the year type of quarterback on your roster, right? Anybody fearing that they could end up like that, and the Commanders, kind of bottling this up and messing this up somehow. I like that they brought in so many new pieces to this organization, right? Because that's why I love it so much. Everybody in this organization that was there in the past, basically, for the RG3 experiment and experience, are now pretty much gone. It helps to kind of forget and move on from that and not repeat the same mistakes when the people who are making these big decisions, bringing in off-season additions or personnel decisions, hirings, and all that sort of stuff. It helps when the guys in the past aren't there anymore. That's why I like what Josh Harris is doing as the new owner. The general manager, Adam Peters, I think was a home run hit. Dan Quinn is a great head coach, just from what you hear anybody from the connection he has with his players. And Cliff Kingsbury, right? He got killed in Arizona for the head coaching job. Everybody critiqued him. He didn't spend too much time there either, but now as an offensive coordinator, you can kind of see that that's his niche role. That's what he excels at, and bringing him into that role, I think, is another great move for this organization. So now that anybody's potential about this organization, and it really makes me more confident now, not only in Jayden, because I think Jayden overall is talented enough to put on performances like this. The fact that the organization has done so much within themselves, improving themselves, but also, the way that they've attacked the offseason, right? Because by getting the best out of Jayden Daniels, that's step one, right? But then getting the best out of everybody else around him is what we can kind of look forward to now. Not seeking comfort or not being comfortable now with just Jayden Daniels. He looks good, so let's just over-depend on him, right? That's the mistake they made with RG3. Him doing basically everything, he gets himself hurt, and then he's never the same from then. You can't repeat that same mistake, and I don't think they will, right, with these new group of guys. You just look at the way that they've attacked the offseason and the kind of Biotic, linebacker Bobby Wagner, wide receiver Noah Brown, reinforcing these spots. If you compare it to like the Chicago Bears, not to throw any shade on them, I liked what the Chicago Bears did, but maybe they overlooked the importance of the offensive line, right? Where the Commanders made it a priority to go out and get a center, get an offensive guard. On the defensive side, get a culture establisher like Bobby Wagner, who's been around success in his career. Those are the type of guys that Dan Quinn, Adam Peters, and Josh Harris have brought in to establish these sort of things that people might overlook, to where it really makes a difference for a young quarterback. And that's where you get results like you do on Monday to kind of validate this path that they've decided to take. All right about, kind of patting themselves on the back right now. How do they get the best out of this roster right now? Because it's going pretty well through 3 weeks. But going forward, I still think they need help on the offensive tackles. I think definitely is an area to look at. I need somebody outside of Terry McLaurin to kind of be that go-to guy. Zach Ertz is nice. Luke McCaffrey's a decent player. But I need more elite level talent right now around Jayden Daniels. Of course, they're not going to change everything right now, but that's something to keep in mind, right? To not just be complacent about it. Jayden Daniels is talented enough to make it work right now, but it would be a disservice then for all the work that they've done up until this point to kind of sit back and think that Jayden's just going to take it from here, right? That's not how it works. If anything, it's harder now to get from this point where you establish you have a guy to having him take that second, third step to where eventually he gets to a point where he's comfortable enough being everything for this organization, right? But that's still a long way away. But the start of this has been very well, in comparison to any other rookie quarterbacks or any other just young quarterbacks in general. Jayden Daniels definitely put on a display, and I think it doesn't go without saying that the Commanders' job in the offseason, the production, and the performance that they did in the offseason is definitely worth mentioning, and Dan Quinn seems to have a good headspace about it in how he approaches it going forward. So I liked what Dan Quinn said. I love the performances, so hopefully that is a normality for Washington going forward with Jayden Daniels. But speaking about young quarterbacks just in this draft, on the other side, just one pick before Jayden Daniels was Caleb Williams, and him and second-year quarterback for the Tennessee Titans, Will Levis, have not been off to the most impressive of starts. We're going to look at those two situations specifically and compare them to one another. They share a lot of similarities, so we're going to look at those two spots and figure out which quarterback situation I'm more worried about going forward. That is coming up right after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue on talking about young quarterbacks in the NFL. For every good start, for every breakout performance, it seems like there's an opposite reaction to some other young quarterbacks in the NFL, specifically with Will Levis and Caleb Williams. I, for one, was very high on the Tennessee Titans, right? I've come on here, talked about them and how I like the addition on defense. I like Brian Callahan as their coach. I love them bringing in Tyler Boyd's, Calvin Ridley's of the world, right? Before the season started, I liked all of their additions and all surrounding Will Levis. And I know I prefaced having Will Levis still be a critical portion of this, right? Other than being the quarterback, the idea of starting over essentially with him, I thought that was going to be a big swinging point on how the season was going to go for them, and it looks like I was right from that point. But overall, the Titans have been pretty disappointing, and likewise, the same can be said about the Chicago Bears, about my confidence level in them before the season started. I loved all of their additions and kind of had them in the mix of being a pretty tough, competitive team. Maybe not with the best record, but still being able to have some moments where you look at them and think, wow, that was a great play, or wow, they're almost there. They really competed with one of the best teams in the NFL. But again, with Caleb and the struggles he's shown, the struggles overall from the Chicago Bears, these two teams, the more you look at them, the more similar it looks from the outside and obviously from the inside looking out as well, because after 3 weeks, both teams are obviously 0-3, and both quarterbacks don't look like they're ready yet to be that final piece of the puzzle that I thought, they were going to just transition to easily. Not to say that Jayden Daniels did it perfectly, but we've seen it quicker from him to where Caleb and Will Levis still now in his second year, it looks like they're just not grasping it yet. Or to me, the situation around them isn't ideal as well. I don't think it's fair to blame it all just on them. So looking more into their season and looking more as to how well they've performed so far, I've kind of looked at all the stats that are pretty prominent for quarterbacks in the NFL and kind of see where Will Levis and Caleb Williams rank among the other quarterbacks and just how their stats line up right now. Looking at the completion percentage for both of these guys, you have Will Levis at 68%, which ranks 13th in the NFL. Then you have Caleb Williams down even further than that at 59%, which is 25th in the NFL. Then you look at total yards for Will Levis. He has 579 total yards through 3 games, which is 24th in the NFL as of right now. And Caleb Williams has 630 yards, which is 17th in the NFL right now. Then yards per game, pretty much the same thing. Will Levis is averaging 193 yards per game, and slightly above that, Caleb Williams is at 210. The rankings don't change, obviously, there. Then the touchdowns, you have Will Levis at 4, which is actually top 10. He is number 9 in terms of touchdowns thrown. And Caleb Williams has only thrown 2 touchdowns. On the other end of it, he's 24th in the NFL in that category. Then interceptions, obviously, not something you want to be leading in. Will Levis has 5 interceptions, which is second most in the NFL, only behind Anthony Richardson, and Caleb Williams just behind him tied for third place with 4 interceptions through 3 games. The QBR and the quarterback ratings, again, are probably among some of the worst in the NFL. The QBR for Will Levis, the highest QBR right now, has been 29.6, and Caleb Williams hasn't been, or actually Caleb Williams is a little bit worse at 26.8. Will Levis ranks 28th, and Caleb Williams ranks at 29th in that category. And lastly, the quarterback rating put up by both of these guys. Will Levis, a 76.5 quarterback rating, has been his highest this year, which has been only 25th in the NFL right now. And Caleb Williams, worse than that, 65.3, which is 28th in the NFL right now. None of these rankings have any quarterback higher than 13th in any of these categories, which 13th in one category or in a couple categories is okay, but the rest of them having Caleb and Will Levis near the bottom 5, mostly top or bottom 10 in most of these categories, is definitely worrying. And then, of course, the stats don't tell the entire story, because if you watch these guys play, they've been in some relatively close games. You look at Will Levis, the game against the Packers, against Malik Willis. I thought that was a game that they could take at home. And they were in spots where they could have won it, but of course, it came down to Will Levis, right, making that boneheaded decision to throw it behind him while he was parallel to the ground, which is just weird. It's hard to describe because that's something a quarterback should obviously not do. So that game, boiled down to him. He's had some rough goings of it, or actually not the Packers, the Jets, the second week of the season. Against the Packers, actually, this past week, he threw that pick 6 to Jair Alexander, just miscalculating the throw. Again, another play that you'd love to have back, obviously looking back at it. So the way that they've played, for all the bad plays that they've made, there has been some good throws. Will Levis made a great throw to Calvin Ridley in that Jets game to score a touchdown as well. When everything is going like it should, he's following the game plan, or everything's flowing very nicely, Will Levis looks like he is under control for the most part. And then also for Caleb Williams, in some of these games, you look at him and he can make some wow plays, some wow throws for sure, but other times, again, much like Will Levis, when things become frantic or discombobulated, I feel like they try to overcompensate some of the issues that they might see, some of the problems with guys rushing at them, right? They try to over-rely on their athleticism, their arm talent, which if they're standing right there and you ask them to make any throw or how far they can throw down the field, Will Levis and Caleb probably have some of the best arms, arguably, in the NFL. But again, once things become frantic, they kind of overestimate their athleticism or over-rely on it. And that's where you get some of the extended plays. You take unnecessary hits, and most of the time it leads to bad decisions when you're running all over the place, trying to buy yourself some time. You can't really get a good picture of everything in front of you. You think someone's open, so you throw it, but the timing is all off, and it usually leads to interceptions like we've seen Caleb throw, like we've seen Will Levis throw, and just bad decisions overall. That's where I think right now it's their most glaring issue, when things sort of break down, when they become a bit frantic and they're not maybe used to being in the pocket so much. It becomes a flaw of their game, and they're still pretty young, obviously. They're still pretty new to this whole NFL thing, right? To cut them a little bit of slack. Caleb's only a rookie, has only played 3 games in the NFL, and Will Levis, in his second year, he's played longer, but it's hard. Just ask Bryce Young how hard it is to go from one system, trying to learn it, trying to perfect everything in your rookie year, to then having it all being scraped and thrown away into the garbage and trying to learn something else, brand new verbiage, new everything, trying to learn everything there is to know about that system, and then how teams try to attack it and whatnot. In your second year, only to kind of restart everything can't be much easier than what Caleb's going through right now. And I thought it was ironic, now getting into the similarities between both of these teams, how similar they went about going through this offseason, right? Because you look at the reinforcements that they made, the Tennessee Titans bringing in Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, adding on to DJ Moore, or actually adding on to DeAndre Hopkins. For the Bears, adding on to DJ Moore, they likewise brought in Keenan Allen and drafted Rome Odunze. They brought in 2 wide receivers each to make this big 3 at that spot. And also they added running backs. The Titans added Tony Pollard. The Chicago Bears added DeAndre Swift. And also, they've added mostly to their offense, right? Because their defenses have been pretty solid, or at least pretty good enough to win you some of these games, right? I think with the level of defense that the Titans have, they should have at least won one of these games, or actually 2 of these games, because they should have won against the Bears. Ironic enough, they've already played against each other. The Titans should have won that game. They didn't allow a touchdown on defense, right? It was mostly just the Bears defense scoring as well. So the Titans could really have 2 wins if also they would have won that Jets game, if it wasn't for that bad decision by Will Levis. They could be 2-1 right now, and we wouldn't organizations and what creates these differences in a lot of these games. And you look at the Chicago Bears and their defense, it basically won them the game against the Titans. Then you look at the Colts, they were in it. The Chicago Bears defense kind of kept them in it, but their offense couldn't respond in an adequate amount of production the other way. And to me, that's where you can kind of look at the team aspect of this all, right? It's not just the fact that these 2 guys can't play in the NFL. These 2 guys are very talented, but not everybody can look like Jayden Daniels. One, because not everybody's the same player, but also you look at the additions and how the Commanders are going about things, and you look at these 2 teams and how different it is, because while these guys might have the big 3s at wide receivers, the biggest thing about both of them is that I don't really like their running game. And then once the running game isn't really working, you look at why that is, and both of these teams' offensive lines aren't great. You look at the amount of sacks both of them have taken. Will Levis has been sacked 15 times already. That's second in the NFL. And Caleb Williams has been sacked 13 times. That's third in the NFL so far. And the running game, the lack of the running game for both of these teams is really what bothers me. Because you look at the Titans, they've ran the ball 11 total times last week against the Green Bay Packers, and the other games, they've ran it a total of 26 and 28 times, respectively, as a whole in each of those games. The Titans are bottom 5 in rush attempts in the NFL, and they're only middle of the pack in all other categories in the running, category overall. And that's just not good enough. For as talented as all these receivers are, you can see why, if it's such an imbalance like this, it leads to more of an opportunity for Will Levis, who is still probably trying to learn everything, to make more mistakes. So that's something I really don't like about it. And also, Chicago might be even worse because they're middle of the pack to bottom in the NFL in all the rushing categories. It stands out in the yards department because it shows the production or the lack of production that this running game produces. You look at some of these numbers, 31, the Bears rank 31st in the NFL in total yards and yards per game rushing. And also to add on top of that, because they're not seeing the each game, he threw for a certain amount the first game, that jumped up in the second game, and he just threw 52 times in week 3. They're not going to win any games with Caleb throwing 52 times. I'll tell you that right now. As talented as he is, that offensive line, having him throw that many times gives the other team an opportunity to just run at him because of how bad this offensive line is. In pass protection, you see it with the amount of sacks Caleb's taken, and then in the running game, they're not producing anything as well. They're not even like one-dimensional. They're like no-dimensional or something like that. It's hard to produce anything because of the fact that these offenses have been kind of built backwards almost. They've really negated. It's only 2 guys, but it makes the difference because this Bears offensive line, the Titans offensive line, and their running games each have not been particularly good. That's something else the Commanders do very well with Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. It might not be the most household names, but they're looking a lot better right now with their quarterback. So that's something I think I attribute it to at this point. And if I were to say I'm more worried about one of these situations, I would probably say Caleb, right? Because the Bears used up a lot to go and get him. They planned everything around Caleb for the last 7 months, 8 months. So everybody knew he was going to be a Chicago Bears player. So for it to kind of not start off this good or this well, and then you start thinking existential crises, right? And how are the Bears going to ruin another top drafted quarterback? And then you look at how Jayden Daniels is playing, you go to a very pessimistic place. But it's weird because I also think that the Bears should get out of it sooner rather than the Tennessee Titans, just because I feel like Ryan Poles has been very adamant about trying to improve this team, going out and being uber aggressive, going out and really having a clear vision of what he wants in this organization. I don't think he'd let Caleb Williams be a bust or anything like that. So I'm more worried about them now for the worst outcome, the worst possible scenario that can happen with them. But in the other sense, I feel like they could get out of it sooner because they know how significant this is. They know how special it is to have a number 1 pick, be the quarterback, be the face of your franchise. I think the consequences on the other side of that will make me feel like Ryan Poles is really going to be very aggressive in trying to correct this situation. He's obviously seen it now. They're not very good at 0-3, obviously. So I think this should spark them a little bit, that kind of kick things into gear. And I don't think he's afraid of making some big decisions, some big personnel changes, or suggesting it if he has to. But that's pretty much where I stand on both of them. Caleb and Will haven't been the most exciting as of yet. They've looked a little bit all over the place, but still, it is relatively early. We're not talking playoffs anymore, I don't think, for these teams, but at least getting it to look better should be both of their goals going forward. But speaking about going forward, talking about some personnel changes, we look at the Jacksonville Jaguars and we ask the question, is Doug Peterson, or should Doug Peterson be on the hot seat if this team goes to 0-4. We look at what their owner had to say about it, what Doug Peterson said about the Bills' loss, and what are our thoughts on Doug Peterson and whether or not he should be on the hot seat. That is coming up in just a few seconds.
GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running on Sports Channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to discuss another 0-3 team, unfortunately, for the Jacksonville Jaguars now in this scenario that they find themselves in after getting embarrassed last week, or I should just say a couple days ago, to the Buffalo Bills 47-10, and now being still winless at 0-3. It's hard to think of worse scenarios across the NFL than the Jaguars find themselves in right now, because not only have they been on the wrong end of some pretty bad losses. You look at the Miami Dolphins game, the lead that they had in that game, to give it up towards the end didn't look great. Then you kind of get beat up at home by the Browns and their defense. They beat up on Trevor Lawrence pretty good. And then coming into this game, another tough road contest, and it was just a non-competition, no entertainment aspect, no competition. They didn't meet the standards that the Bills are obviously playing at right now. And to make matters worse, they're playing the Houston Texans on the road this upcoming week, which doesn't look promising at all. So that's why we ask the question of how close Doug Peterson is to being on the hot seat, right? Because this is obviously something that will be brought up now in these scenarios when the fans, when anybody in the organization is desperate to kind of see some results, and when you try to think about some of the changes that you can bring to the Jaguars right now to make some immediate changes already. The coach is one of the easiest and one of the quickest areas to go to right away, because they're not going to move Trevor, obviously, just paying him, nor arguably should they, because he's only like 24, 25 years old. They're not going to go out and sign a top-tier secondary player to help their very weak secondary. Also, they're not going to go out and find an elite lineman right now just sitting there on the market. So you look at the changes that you can make right now, and it's always going to be the head coach, one of the first people named to be, let go of, to try and create some change. And you look at what the Jaguars owner said about a month ago. Their owner, Shad Khan, he had in mind heading into this year in terms of expectations, and discussing the amount of pressure essentially that the Jaguars were dealing with this year, when he mentioned about a month ago the idea of these expectations and how he wanted to see this team win essentially right off the bat, and do it now, with the words he was saying, because he said winning now is the expectation. Make no mistake, this is the best team assembled by the Jacksonville Jaguars ever. Best players, best coaches. But most importantly, let's prove it by winning now. And it's a hard reality when you have these comments, and then when you're looking at the game on Monday, right, this team was down a franchise record 31 points at half. Their defense gave up as many touchdowns as the offense had first downs in the first two quarters, right? If that makes sense, I'll say it again. Their defense gave up as many touchdowns, 5, as the offense had first downs in the first two quarters. Their offense in the first two quarters had 5 first downs, and that's how many touchdowns the Bills had on this defense in the first two quarters, which it might take a while to kind of understand that, but when you really get what I'm trying to say. It's a new low essentially for the Jaguars in here. And when you hear the words coming from their owner, how this is the best team assembled by the Jacksonville Jaguars ever. I'm pretty sure he said this close to when they gave this extension to Trevor Lawrence. So there's a bit of that in his comments, right? The idea of the confidence in wanting to reinforce this big decision that you had in giving Trevor Lawrence this money. But now, just a month later, you're at the bottom of the league. It doesn't look like things could get any better. It's hard to say they could get any worse also, but it's in a bad spot right now, especially with these expectations and trying to find any sort of solutions quickly. And I think that's what Doug Peterson was alluding to in his statements that he made after the loss to the Buffalo Bills, when he said there has to be changes, whether it's play, design, personnel, everything. Everything's on the table, let's call it. And those are all things that I have to look at. We have to look at as a staff and make the adjustments. And it's ironic because you're talking about changes, everything's on the table, that one of these changes could potentially be him. And necessarily, just to give my answer now, I wouldn't do that right now. 0-4, 0-3 is the last place you want to be, right? But I still have some confidence in Doug Peterson, and I think he's earned that just by the way he's, come in to the Jacksonville Jaguars and kind of changed everything around pretty quickly. You just look at last year, and it's weird to kind of pinpoint an area where this team has just gone wrong, essentially. I think really just comes down, if I were to put a finger on it, to the idea of not reinforcing this team enough in the offseason. And, they added guys like Mitch Morse, a new center. They added guys like Darnell Savage on the back end, Eric Armstead to their defensive line. So it's not like they just sat on their hands like maybe the Cowboys did or something, but it's just not panned out right now. And injuries definitely have a say in this. Tice, I forget his first name, but their top defensive back, Campbell, he's on the IR. Darnell Savage isn't playing. He's dealing with an injury. So now their starting linebacker, Eliakon, also got hurt in the game against the Bills. They're dealing with some of that, but still, you look at last year and how things started off pretty towards the end of the year, where they lost their last 5 of their 6 games to crash out of all of the playoff spots. And then now you start 0-3 in this year, and you take all of that sample size, you look at a reality where the Jacksonville Jaguars have now lost 8 of their last 9 games dating back to last year. And, you made some changes, you added some guys, but it's obviously not working. So if that's not the case and somebody's trying to look for explanations, you look at what's, been kept the same or what you can change. And Doug Peterson is obviously one of the main candidates to be that change, to be sort of this example of trying to just create a change, create a spark to this team, because they need it right now. They're not in a good place, obviously, with Trevor's contract. And it's harsh to say that, I think, just because you don't want to say that he hasn't earned his contract. But still, for the Jaguars to be in that situation, if they even considered changing him at any point, they really can't do that with the guaranteed money they owe him and this just massive contract they gave him. It's not something that's feasible right now, so they're stuck from that point. So any inconsistencies, any bad performances we see from Trevor, some obvious ones, you're just going to have to live with. So Doug Peterson is obviously one of the main candidates right now to be that change, to kind of spark something in this team. And it also looks like the team is worse somehow now. I mentioned the additions before, but this defense isn't holding anyone down. The offensive line can't really protect Trevor, even though, like I said, they added a new center in Mitch Morse. Evidently, they needed more than that, I guess. Then Trevor Lawrence also has been inconsistent at times, making some nice throws, but also making some not so nice throws as well. So all of that culminated into the fact that, I said it last episode, I believe, that these two sides of the ball don't really complement each other. And you could look at it as a player thing, personnel thing, or you could also just look at it going back to Doug Peterson and the question how maybe the coach just isn't pushing the right buttons or isn't calling the right plays to make both of these sides kind of help each other. Because right now it looks like they're two different entities that the defense is just going out there and hoping to stop somebody, but they evidently can't. And the offense is going back out there as well. And it just looks like it's not a balanced situation right now with the Jaguars as they stand. And the last thing you want to say, but you can't avoid even thinking it or just being brought up, is that this is starting to look like a regression for the Jaguars going back to last year. How you ended, you wanted to see it get better, but now you still lose. You don't want this to become a regression, especially when you have to pay your quarterback $55 million per year. You can't have this team regress and then likewise have this quarterback regress instead of getting better, because again, he's only just about to turn 25. To see him take a step back, that's the last thing this Jaguars team needs, because you saw some of the successes that they had last year, right? In the comeback win against the Chargers about 2 years ago, and how promising they looked then. Then they start off the year hot, and now they're sort of crashing out of everything, it seems like. You can't have it all just kind of fall on top of you, because you were so close to kind of being one of the contending teams at least. But now this has come out of nowhere, and to try and make a change and kind of salvage everything, it goes right to Doug Peterson. But with saying that, I wouldn't change him right now. I think he's earned a little bit of leeway here to try and right the ship, because I think he is a well-respected coach. His players like him. He is a leader of men. So I think you can just give him the benefit of the doubt right now to try and right this ship right now. And you look at the games going forward and how he can go about that. I mentioned Houston this week, not so promising. I would bet them to lose that game. So then you find yourself at 0-4. The next two games, or the next three games, are the biggest ones in their upcoming schedule, because after the Houston game, you play at home against the Jaguars, or at home against the Colts, I should say. So that's a game where you should win or have your best chance of winning. Then you have two games in London, one against the Chicago Bears and another one against the Patriots. Ideally, in a perfect, flawless world, you want to win all three of those games, right? And then if you start 0-4 after the Houston game, you win 3 in a row, now you're at 3-4. And I think they're going to need it, because the next games after that, I wouldn't take them in any of those games. You have a home game after the two London games against the Packers. You travel to Philadelphia after that. Then you're at home against the Minnesota Vikings. And then you travel to Detroit before playing Houston at home again. I wouldn't take the Jaguars based on what we know about all these teams in any of those games. So you need to extend the leash a little bit here and get these next 3 wins, because this schedule is brutal for the Jaguars, and it's not doing them any favors. So it makes these next games so critical. It makes the attention to detail and just the stress on the next couple of games so much more important for the Jaguars than arguably anybody else's next 3 games in the NFL, because we're talking about he should be on the hot seat yet. If he loses to the Colts, and then if he goes like 2-3, or I should say 1-3 in the next 3 games, then I would really consider him a candidate to be one of the first coaches fired, because like, again, you have to win at least 2 of these next 3 games, because the rest of it is brutal. So right now, I'm not going to say that he should be on the hot seat. I think he's bought himself a bit of time just on his resume and who he is, but it could all come crashing down very quickly if, the results aren't there. So that's what I think about Doug Peterson and the Jaguars. Very, very, very critical moments for them going forward. But now, moving over to the NFC, we're going to preview one of the games coming up this weekend, an NFC South matchup between the Saints and the Atlanta Falcons. A big game for that division, 2 of the more exciting teams in that division as well. We're going to look at everything, the key matchups, the factors and everything like that, some injury news for both of these sides, and give my predictions on the winner of this contest. So that's coming up in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We are back on the show now to look a little bit forward to week 4 now. Not officially there yet. That'll be tomorrow when we officially start the week with the Giants taking on the Dallas Cowboys. But I got a bit ahead of myself here with this preview because this is an interesting contest that I'm really looking forward to seeing, because we have an NFC South matchup this week in the NFL. The first divisional game for the Atlanta Falcons. This will be the second divisional game for the Saints. We have the Saints traveling to Atlanta in this week 4 matchup. Both teams coming off of a tough loss last week at home for both of them. The Saints losing at home to the Eagles and the Falcons losing at home to the Kansas City Chiefs. The Saints enter this contest at 2-1, and the Falcons, on the other side of it, they enter it at 1-2. ESPN Bet this morning had the Falcons as 1.5-point favorites at home, and I think that's pretty fair. That's pretty fair, and that's what adds so much more to this contest, this game, pretty much for me, because they're very evenly matched when you look at it, and the entire division as a whole. You look at the Buccaneers, they're 2-1 as well. It looks like they're not going away. The Saints surprising everybody with their prolific offense and Clint Kubiak leading that group. The Falcons and all the excitement they've had with Kirk Cousins coming over, Raheem Morris, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and all that stuff. And even the Panthers surprising everybody with their win as well. They're 1-2. They have the same record as the Falcons. So I think this division is surprising a lot of people with how some of the games have turned out, surprisingly or in a disappointing way. So it adds more to this game, I think, in my opinion. And looking at these two teams individually, you have the Atlanta Falcons first, and they have some significant injuries to deal with coming off of last week, because their center, Drew Dahlman, was placed on the IR with a high ankle sprain. He'll be out for the next 4 weeks, which is a massive loss. Obviously, for the pass protection, obviously that exchange with Kirk Cousins, and the running game. The running game is so huge for the Falcons, so to not have an athletic starting center there for them is going to be a big miss. And likewise, their offensive tackle, Caleb McGarry, is listed as questionable with a MCL sprain. And based on the other MCL sprains we've seen already, he should, if I was to predict, he should miss this contest. He is listed as questionable, but I feel like this is at least a 2-week sort of recovery for anybody in the NFL. So I don't expect to see Caleb McGarry out there, which is another big loss for the Falcons offensive line. And looking back to last week, they lost 22-17 to the Chiefs on Sunday Night Football. Not their best day in the running game, but Drake London looked very good again. Darnell Mooney had a solid game as well. Kyle Pitts is another one that I'll say again, he needs more than 2 receptions a game. Like, that's insane to me. They were pretty big plays, but you look at Kyle Pitts out there, and I see him a lot of times in pass protection or just in very heavy personnel groupings, and I feel like he should be used a lot more, especially with how successful Kirk has been with the tight ends. I don't like him getting 2 receptions. That's something that I can't wrap my head around. Then, on a more positive note, their defense played very well again. That, to me, has been their best part of their team so far, and it's weird to say because that's the last thing I would have thought in the offseason. But Justin Simmons, Jesse Bates, I couldn't remember his name, are very, very good for them. Impact players that really take away the side of the field, the section of the field that they're on, and it's very helpful for them going forward. Matthew Judon has been very well for them as well. Can't forget about him. And their defense was able to keep Atlanta in the game with an interception on Patrick Mahomes, taking field goals for the Chiefs rather than touchdowns. I think that's going to be their MO going forward, but their offense definitely needs to do more to live up to these expectations, but also help their defense doing great things on that side of the ball. Then it also, in that game against the Chiefs, it came down to 2 fourth down calls that didn't go in their way. You look at one of them, it looked like a miscommunication to Drake London in the end zone. And then the second call, I didn't like at all. I don't like fourth and shorts going horizontal east and west rather than north and south. So, it definitely felt more like the Falcons kind of lost or threw that game away more so than the Chiefs went out there and dominated them. But still, they enter now this contest at 1-2 with some things to figure out and also some injuries to try and get over. Then you look at the Saints, also dealing with some injuries. Their center, Eric McCoy, is going to be out for the next 6 to 8 weeks with a groin injury. He is going to need surgery, but he was not placed on the IR. Also on the offensive line, Cesar Ruiz, their guard, also got banged up against the Eagles. I'm assuming he's going to be good to go for this game. He doesn't have an injury designation when I checked on ESPN. So he got banged up in that game, but he should be all right. So that's a positive sign for the Saints going forward. But looking back on their game and what we can take away from that loss to the Eagles, it was 15-12 to Philadelphia, where their running game wasn't really there as much as it was the first 2 weeks, but their defense played very well. Again, I was pleasantly surprised with how well they were able to keep down the Eagles, stifle Saquon Barkley for a decent amount of the game. He wasn't like taking over or anything like that. Dallas Goedert had a solid game, but even still, the game was pretty much there for the taking until the fourth quarter. So I was very impressed with their defense, combined with their special teams that also blocked the punt. I'm still dumbfounded by how they didn't win this game, but I hated some of the calls that they made. The fourth down call to go for it near the or after they got that blocked punt, the decision to go for it after that and not take away some sort of points from that play you made on special teams. I really didn't like that call. Derek Carr also struggled with pressure and trying to counter it during the game, so that's something maybe the Falcons can take advantage of in this contest, because the Saints offense looked very human. They came back to earth, per se, from putting up 40-plus points in each of their first 2 games. We kind of saw a more normal contest from them, or something that we expected to see from them in that game against the Eagles, and that's something where the Falcons, I believe, can kind of take advantage of them, and that's where I kind of get my matchups and my key factors into this game, because one of the first ones I'm looking at is Grady Jarrett going up against that interior offensive line for the Saints. No Eric McCoy. It's going to be a new center. How successful will Grady Jarrett be in trying to dominate that game, stop their running attack against a backup center? That'll be a big matchup. Also, Kyle Pitts against the Saints secondary and their linebackers. I need to see Kyle Pitts more in this offense. That just needs to happen. He's too talented to just sit there and block and not even get looked at most of the time. And also, you look at the game Dallas Goedert just had. He had like 10 receptions for almost 200 yards. And no offense to Dallas Goedert, but I probably would take Kyle Pitts over him. So, Goddard had a game like that, and there's no reason Kyle Pitts should. I'm not expecting him to get 200 yards, but he has to have a bigger role, a bigger impact in these games, whether it is the play calling or himself just as a player. He needs to be featured more, and against the Saints that just gave up a big day to the previous tight end, I need him to win that matchup. And also, Jesse Bates and Justin Simmons going up against Derek Carr. We saw the struggles Derek Carr had with the secondary and the pressure that the Eagles brought on him. He threw an interception to a safety in Reed Blankenship, and it looks like teams have been avoiding Jesse Bates and Justin Simmons. So how much does Derek Carr test them, and how much success either side has in this contest will be huge. And then we get into some of the factors, some of the storylines to kind of keep track of as we go through this game. Obviously, the running game, which running back dominates the other team's defense, Bijan Robinson or Alvin Kamara. Both of them didn't have a A++ game last week, so who rebounds off of that and can, take over the game like we saw in the first 2 weeks. Also, which defense can get to the other quarterback more often, because both of the quarterbacks are pretty similar. Not too athletic, can make all the throws, are very good in play action, and, working very well within the offense. Derek and Kirk are very similar in that aspect. So can Cam Jordan, can Matthew Judon, can these guys get to Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins and kind of throw them off of their game? We saw the Steelers do it against the Falcons, and we just saw the Eagles do it against the Saints. So that obviously is a way to go about and stopping the other team's offense. And then also, lastly, how different do the Saints or the Atlanta Falcons offensive lines, how different do they look with some of these injuries, right? You have Eric McCoy, the leader of that offensive line, not playing. And for the Falcons, you have, again, the center not playing, but also a very important piece in the right tackle potentially not playing. Which one looks a bit less like themselves, and how big of an impact can that make during the game? Because both of these offensive lines are very big factors, the main factors in how good these offenses can be in the running game and in the passing game. So I'll be interested to see who is more capitulated by not having some of these guys on their offensive line. And that leads me to my prediction. It's going to be a close game, I feel like. Both defenses are playing very well. And Atlanta playing at home, I don't think they're going to lose back-to-back home games. So I'm going to barely take the Falcons in this game. Unless they finally use Pitts like they should do, they should win this game in comfortable fashion if Kyle Pitts has a good game, but I'm still taking them overall in a close game. I think Derek Carr struggled throwing against the Philadelphia Eagles team. The pressure that they brought, I feel like Raheem Morris will dial up a couple more blitzes, try to get in the face of Derek Carr, and really rely on his two safeties back there to kind of police everything in the back end and not allow any big gains or not allow many completions overall. I think they have the luxury of doing that with two great safeties back there. And the attention to not let Chris Olave beat them. I think they're very capable of matching up A.J. Terrell with them very well. So doing that, bringing more guys around the box to stop the run, getting Derek Carr's face, and police everything in the back end with Jesse and Justin, I think will be the difference in this game. The Falcons will go to 2-2. Same with the Saints in this contest. That is what I believe will happen. It's going to be a great game, I'm assuming, because both of these teams have been very exciting, but also a little disappointing just off of last week. So that is where we'll leave that preview. But we have one more topic to get to, a pretty interesting one, because it's 2 weeks now that Cam Taylor-Britt, if you know who that is, defensive back for the Bengals. It's been 2 weeks now that he's been very public about criticizing the opponents that he's been going up against, and now Zach Taylor, the head coach of the Bengals, has finally said something about it. So stay tuned to find out my thoughts on him speaking out about his opponents, but also what Zach Taylor had to say about his comments as well. We'll be right back in just a few seconds. Thank you for joining me here on my last segment of today's show. Not too much to do with the production on the field, but what happens off of the field, right? We had to talk about this ongoing thing between Cam Taylor-Britt, the defensive back for the Bengals, and the teams he plays, the opponents he plays, because it's 2 weeks now in a row that Cam Taylor-Britt has talked trash about his opponents, and both times they've lost, evidently, them being still 0-3. If you remember the first one, his first comments on Xavier Worthy when they faced the Kansas City Chiefs, and how Xavier Worthy could only run straight, and how he wasn't really that fast unless you got your hands on him. And to his credit, it worked out better for him in that game because he had a very impressive interception, but they still lost at the end of the day. So now, this week, going into Monday's game against the Commanders, going to face a young rookie quarterback, right? The Bengals were obviously favored in this game, and I'm sure within the locker room, I'm sure Cam Taylor-Britt was feeling it like they should handle the Commanders pretty easily with the comments that he made on their offense as a whole. Cliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator, and the offense that they ran around Jayden Daniels, because he said that they don't make him do a lot, Jayden Daniels that is. They keep it really simple for him, nice college offense. Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator, so they love to move guys around here and there, but just keep it real simple for him, which I will get into more as to what I feel about it, but you could have just left it at they run a nice, simple offense for him. They make him not do a lot. They keep it real simple for him. That's all Cam Taylor-Britt had to say. He could have ended it right there. But to go further and say it's a nice college offense, that they like to move guys around here and there, but just keep it real simple for him, it's like, one of those backhanded compliments. Unnecessary most of the times in many instances, and it was unnecessary to say here. And even though you felt like the favorites, which some people might hit back at because they haven't won a game yet, it's just gets to a point where you just don't need to say it. To me, in that instance, when I saw it right away, I'm thinking, man, they better win this game, or else, what does that say about your defense, right? That you think this is a nice, simple college offense, but you still lose. That was my mindset right away. And, obviously, Jayden Daniels goes on to have his breakthrough game. Obviously, right, that was supposed to happen. He went 21 of 23, 254 yards, and accounted for 3 touchdowns against this defense. That same college-level offense, the college-level offense run by this rookie quarterback, scored 3 touchdowns on you and put up nearly 40 points on your defense. And that's where I think when you kind of get shown up like this, it was brought up to Zach Taylor's attention, and he didn't really feel great about Cam Taylor-Britt's comments. He addressed it pretty directly. He said, "That's not what we do. We praise our team, praise the other team. We don't need to take shots like that. That team hasn't punted in 2 weeks. They've scored on every single possession the last 2 weeks." And Cam Taylor-Britt also was asked about it after the game, and he said he didn't regret his comments. He said also that he didn't mean it to be in a malicious way. He also felt that it was made bigger than what he thought it was going to be. He didn't think it was going to take the way that it did. He didn't think it would catch the momentum that it evidently did, but obviously that was the opposite of what happened, and he admitted that he's just gonna eat his words after taking another loss, but also he still was pretty adamant about that it was still resembled a college level offense, which was pretty funny. But to me, now that I can get my thoughts on it, now that I've brought out all the facts about the situation, I have no problem with the confidence or the attitude or setting a tone going into the game, especially against the Chiefs, right? The mini rivalry that they've had with the Bengals over the years in the playoff games, Joe Burrow, Burrowhead, the comments by Jamar Chase on Patrick answering back on social media, that's all fine. But it's different when you add this context in about the Bengals defense, right? Especially on defense. I'll say this one more thing. On defense, when you're talking about defensive backs, anybody on that side of the ball, they have to have a short memory, right? That's always something you hear about defensive backs, anybody on the defensive side of the ball. You just have to go out there and think next play, next play, next play. Because it's hard in the NFL, obviously, to win every single rep against these talented wide receivers. So I understand all of that. But when you bring in the context specifically around the Cincinnati Bengals, that's where I really don't like seeing guys have this arrogance or this ignorance about them, because I just don't think it makes them look any better as they might think they look, I guess you could say, because you lost the first time you did this, right? So doing it again brings an unnecessary amount of attention to you and a defense that against the passing game in the first 2 weeks and just overall has been one of the worst I think we've seen in the NFL. So the run defense obviously isn't anything great either. You don't want to absolve them, but this passing defense, your offense put up 33 points in this game and you still lost to a rookie quarterback who you only managed to force into 2 incompletions, again, to a rookie quarterback who up until this point hasn't thrown a touchdown at all. They kicked 7 field goals against the Giants, and in week 1, they got beat pretty handedly by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now you let him walk into your stadium, you make these comments, thinking that you're going to probably walk all over them, and their offense just doesn't miss a beat. Like Zach Taylor says, they haven't punted in the last 2 weeks, and they've scored in every possession the last 2 weeks as well. So it says a lot when you, again, the confidence to say it again. You don't want to kind of lay down any other team. I understand that, obviously, but especially when your side of the ball is the big reason why you haven't really won these games, when you're putting up 30 plus points, more often than not, you expect to win these games, especially against a Commanders team that is just trying now to get started up again with a new coach, new everything basically. And when the defense is the one talking, when the defense is trying to get these checks that they evidently can't cash at the end of the day, writing these checks that the entire defense can't cash, it's not a good look, and it just adds more attention. It brings more eyeballs really to this defense, where I don't think they need any more attention on them, because if you just watch the game and Cam Taylor-Britt doesn't say anything, you look at how it becomes pretty evident how this defense is not the strong point of this team, right? It's not what is a reliable part of this team. So when they still go out there and Cam Taylor-Britt really is the only one on that defense talking this talk like they've been dominating teams so far, like they haven't won a game. Losing, like Michael Parsons said, I think in an interview recently, it's very humbling. So to not take that approach, I don't really understand it. Not even like it's not like they've even been all right on the defensive side of the ball. They've not been good at all, and you're still making these statements like you need to instigate your opponent or anything like that. It really felt unnecessary to me. I thought it was pretty foolish to see it out of Cam Taylor-Britt. It looks arrogant for a team that hasn't won a game and still thinks these other teams run simple offenses, right? To say that this college level offense is, in a way, maybe not something you're really fearing or something that you're not really worried about. Afterwards, like I said, if you don't win these games by some way or another, if you talk the talk and then don't walk the walk, how does it make your defense look that this college level offense that you're not worried about goes into your home field and beats you and puts up nearly 40 points on you? It makes you look a lot worse, obviously, now that you have to backtrack on your statement made at the beginning of the game. Zach Taylor's obviously not a fan of it. And worse, the worst thing about this could be that people begin associating this arrogance and ignorance to the entire team, right? People start saying that this defense is overhyping themselves up, or the defense is talking too much, or they're talking way too much for a team that hasn't won anything, when really it's just one guy that is writing these checks that the defense can't cash. And once that becomes something that you associate to the entire team, the entire defense, it makes it a lot worse, right? I think coming just from one individual to say these things and to say it back-to-back weeks and not have it pan out, it'll be interesting to see if he says anything again, because he'd have an opportunity to going up against the Panthers, right? That would be an ideal situation to be like we're 0-3, but we're going to win next game, right? Or something like that, right, for Cam Taylor-Britt to say, because the Panthers haven't been great, but they just won their first game. So I don't think he'll say anything. Hopefully he's learned his lesson, but again, these situations I just had to bring up because now Zach Taylor's talking about it. It's not looking good. It's unnecessary attention for a team that needs to worry about anything other than just winning, right? They don't need to worry about anything other than just winning. So these things, these extra distractions and things like that, not football related, is the last thing this team needs. And it's not helping out with what Cam Taylor-Britt is saying. So hopefully he's learned his lesson. Hopefully they could just focus in on improving their side of the ball of all sides. So that'll be the last thing I bring up on this show. I had to bring it up because of how it all turned out over the last 2 weeks, but that is going to do it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning into this episode. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, as well as following the network on all forms of social media, where you could also find more content around the NFL on both of the network's YouTube channels, the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel, to find more content around this show and around the NFL. Tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more of these live shows covering everything that there is to cover around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys again for joining me. I'll see you guys next time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee